The most powerful moment in a woman's life isn't when she says, "I do." It's when she looks the man who broke her and says, "I'm your boss now." How many of us have fantasized about the day our worth would be undeniable to those who underestimated us? When the person who once called you disposable suddenly realizes you're indispensable. Picture this. A Valentine's gala in Atlanta's most prestigious hotel. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne flowing. And there he stands, Xavier Blackwood, COO of Pinnacle Media, surveying his kingdom with the confidence of a man who's never faced consequences for his actions. Until she walks in. Ciara Marshall, the ex-wife he discarded 3 years ago on Valentine's Day like she was nothing. The woman he told to go back to your little editing job, while he focused on what really matters. Now standing in the doorway in an emerald gown that commands attention. Her eyes locked on him with the quiet power of someone who knows exactly what's about to happen. "Ladies and gentlemen," announces the board chairman, "please welcome the new Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Publishing and, by extension, our new leader at Pinnacle Media Group, Ciara Marshall." What happens when the tables turn so completely that the man who once called you worthless now has to report to you every Monday morning? Stay with me to witness the most satisfying corporate takeover Atlanta has ever seen. Hey my queens, can you feel that power? That moment when a woman who was told she wasn't enough returns as the woman in charge? This story isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. Reclaiming your worth. Reclaiming your voice. Reclaiming the narrative that someone else tried to write for you. I see you, sister, nursing those wounds from someone who couldn't recognize your brilliance. I see you rebuilding, brick by brick, when they tried to demolish your foundation. But let me tell you something. Your setback was just the setup for your greatest comeback. Your pain wasn't the end of your story. It was the beginning of your ascension. When they underestimate you, let them. When they dismiss you, let them. Because there's nothing more powerful than a black woman who has transformed her heartbreak into her stepping stone. Remember, queens don't compete with pawns. They just make strategic moves in silence until it's time to say, checkmate. The room erupted in polite applause, but Xavier Blackwood heard nothing over the roaring in his ears. Ciara, was now his boss. The woman he had discarded when she no longer fit his vision of the perfect corporate wife was now the person who controlled his professional future. As she began to make her way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and making introductions, Xavier remained frozen in place. His assistant Marcus leaned in, concern etched on his face. "Sir, are you all right?" Xavier couldn't answer. His eyes tracked Ciara's movement through the ballroom. She looked different, confident, powerful. Her once long hair now cut in a sophisticated bob that framed her face perfectly. But it was her eyes that caught him, clear, focused, and completely devoid of the desperate need for his approval that he remembered. When she finally stood before him, he searched for words that wouldn't come. "Hello, Xavier," she said, her voice smooth as aged bourbon. "It's been a while." "Ciara," he managed. "This is unexpected. Is it?" She tilted her head slightly. "I would have thought a man of your strategic thinking would have seen this coming." Before he could respond, she turned to Marcus with a warm smile. "You must be Marcus, Xavier's assistant, correct? I've heard wonderful things about your organizational skills." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, clearly charmed despite himself. "I look forward to working with you," she said, then returned her gaze to Xavier. "We should catch up soon. I'll have my assistant schedule something for Monday morning. First thing." With that, she moved on to the next group of executives, leaving Xavier with the distinct feeling that a storm was brewing. One he had inadvertently set in motion 3 years ago on a Valentine's Day he now bitterly regretted. Xavier, Gerald Thompson, the board chairman, appeared at his elbow, champagne in hand. Quite the surprise, isn't it? Though I must say, Ms. Marshall's presentation to the board last month was extraordinary. Her vision for the Meridian Pinnacle integration is exactly what we need in this changing media landscape. Xavier turned to him, disbelief coloring his features. "You knew? You knew she was the one Meridian was appointing as CEO." Gerald had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. The board was sworn to secrecy until the official announcement. But yes, we've been in talks with Ms. Marshall for some time. Her work at Meridian has been nothing short of revolutionary. Xavier took a large swallow of his champagne, trying to process this information. Ciara had orchestrated this entire scenario. The acquisition, the appointment, the public revelation at the Valentine's Gala, of all places. The symmetry was too perfect to be coincidental. "If you'll excuse me," Xavier said, setting down his glass. "I need some air." He made his way to a small terrace off the main ballroom, the February night air cool against his flushed face. Atlanta's skyline glittered before him, the city he'd always considered his domain. Now, like everything else, it seemed to be slipping from his grasp. Quite a shock, isn't it? Xavier turned to find Olivia Washington, one of the few board members who had always treated Ciara with genuine warmth, even after the divorce. "You knew too," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I did more than know," Olivia replied, her eyes twinkling. "I recommended her. After seeing what she accomplished at Meridian's literary division, turning a struggling imprint into their most profitable sector in less than 2 years, the decision was obvious." Xavier stared at her. "This is personal, Olivia. You know our history." "Business is always personal, Xavier," she replied calmly. "You taught me that, remember? When you passed over my daughter for promotion because you said she lacked killer instinct? When you told Ciara that her career was a distraction from what really mattered?" "Yes, I remember your philosophy quite well." She patted his arm, her smile never wavering. "The board made a business decision based on merit. The fact that it might be uncomfortable for you personally is merely an interesting footnote." As Olivia walked away, Xavier gripped the terrace railing, his knuckles white. For the first time in his professional life, he felt completely outmaneuvered. The look on his face, Ciara told her sister Yvette that evening as they shared dinner in her new corner office, Atlanta's skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I've imagined it 1,000 times, but nothing compared to the reality." Yvette laughed, pouring more wine into both their glasses. "I wish I could have seen it. After what he did to you, that man deserves every uncomfortable moment." Ciara sipped her wine, the victory she'd anticipated for 3 years finally hers. Yet something felt hollow about it, a sensation she hadn't expected. "What's wrong?" Yvette asked, always attuned to her sister's moods. "This is what you wanted, isn't it? The ultimate comeback." Ciara sighed, setting down her glass. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm any better than him, orchestrating all this." "Don't you dare," Yvette said firmly. "You earned this position through hard work and talent. The fact that it happens to make your ex-husband squirm is just cosmic justice." Ciara smiled faintly, but her mind drifted back to the look in Xavier's eyes when she'd approached him at the gala. Beneath the shock and confusion, she had glimpsed something else. A flicker of respect, perhaps even admiration. It was unsettling how much that still affected her, even after everything. "Besides," Yvette continued, oblivious to her sister's thoughts, "this is just the beginning. You're going to transform Pinnacle, make it even more successful than it was under his leadership. That's the real victory." "You're right," Ciara agreed, pushing aside her conflicted feelings. "This isn't about Xavier. It's about building something meaningful." Yet as she looked out at the city lights, Ciara couldn't help but wonder if the satisfaction she had anticipated would ever truly materialize. The triumph of walking into that gala, of seeing Xavier's shock, had been sweet but fleeting. Now came the harder part, proving she deserved this position not because of a personal vendetta, but because she was genuinely the best person for the job. "Remember what Grandma used to say?" Yvette asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Don't waste good energy on bad memories." Ciara laughed. She also said, "Sometimes the best revenge is living well, but sometimes it's watching them squirm." "That woman contained multitudes," Yvette agreed, raising her glass. "To Grandma's wisdom, and to you, CEO Marshall. May you build an empire on the ashes of what he tried to burn down." The weekend passed in a blur of preparation for Xavier. He had pulled every file, reviewed every decision he'd made in the past year, and researched Ciara's career trajectory since their divorce. What he discovered left him both impressed and terrified. After leaving Pinnacle, she had taken a senior editor position at a struggling literary imprint within Meridian Publishing. Within 6 months, she had revitalized their list with 3 bestsellers. A year later, she was running the division. And now, barely 3 years after he had told her she could go back to her little editing job, she was CEO of one of the largest media conglomerates in the country. Sitting in his home office, surrounded by spreadsheets and annual reports, Xavier tried to reconcile the woman he had dismissed so easily with the powerhouse who had engineered such a dramatic reversal of fortune. Had she always been this capable, this strategic? And if so, how had he failed to see it? The answer, when it came to him, was uncomfortable in its simplicity. He had never really looked. He had been so consumed with his own ambitions, so certain of his own superiority, that he had never truly seen Ciara as an equal, let alone a force to be reckoned with. Monday morning found him in his office an hour early, coffee already cold beside him as he rehearsed what he would say when she arrived. Would she fire him immediately? Use her position to humiliate him as he had once humiliated her? Or would she be coldly professional, treating him as just another executive in her new corporate structure? At precisely 9 a.m., his intercom buzzed. "Mr. Blackwood." His assistant's voice came through. "Ms. Marshall is here to see you." Xavier straightened his tie, took a deep breath and said, "Send her in. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself after someone tried to break you, hit that like button right now. Because what happens next isn't just about revenge. It's about reclaiming your power in ways that change not just your life, but the lives of everyone around you." Ciara entered, dressed in a tailored white pantsuit that radiated confidence and authority. Without waiting for an invitation, she took a seat across from his desk. "I thought we'd have this meeting in your office," she said, glancing around. "Before you move to the smaller one down the hall." Xavier felt his stomach tighten. "You're demoting me." "Not exactly." Ciara placed a folder on his desk. "I'm reassigning you. Pinnacle's digital division needs an overhaul. You'll be heading that project, reporting directly to the new COO. "And who would that be?" Xavier asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Layla Johnson. She starts next week." Xavier couldn't hide his shock. Layla had been his protege until he had passed her over for promotion 2 years ago, choosing a less qualified man instead. She had left Pinnacle shortly after. "You've been busy," he observed, struggling to maintain his composure. "I've been strategic," Ciara corrected. "Something you taught me the importance of, though perhaps not in the way you intended." She leaned forward slightly. "Let me be clear, Xavier. I didn't orchestrate this acquisition to get revenge. I did it because Pinnacle has valuable assets that fit perfectly with Meridian's growth strategy. The fact that you happen to work here is incidental. And yet here we are," Xavier said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "You sitting where I always assumed I would be, and me being shuffled off to a division you know I have little interest in." Ciara's expression remained impassive. "The digital division is crucial to Pinnacle's future. I'm putting you there because, despite our personal history, I know you're capable. Whether you choose to see this as an opportunity or a punishment is entirely up to you." She stood, smoothing her already perfect suit. "The transition plan is in the folder. I expect your preliminary strategy for the digital division on my desk by Friday." As she turned to leave, Xavier found himself asking, "Why didn't you just fire me? It would have been simpler." Ciara paused at the door, looking back at him with an expression that wasn't quite a smile. "Because I'm not you, Xavier. I don't discard people when they no longer serve my immediate needs. Besides," she added, "success is the best revenge, and I intend to make Pinnacle very, very successful, with or without your cooperation." The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Xavier alone with the realization that the woman he had once dismissed so casually now held his professional fate in her perfectly manicured hands. As he opened the folder, a memory surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. 3 years ago, almost to the day, The same Valentine's Gala, but a very different outcome. Ciara had arrived at the Westbrook Hotel full of hope, wearing a red dress she'd carefully selected to catch his eye. Their marriage had been strained for months, his focus increasingly on Pinnacle's expansion. Her suggestions about her own career met with dismissive indifference. But it was Valentine's Day, their fifth together, and she had been determined to reconnect, to remind him of the partnership they had once shared. Instead, she had found him in his office adjacent to the ballroom, his expression cold as he informed her their marriage was over. "This isn't working, Ciara," he had said, not even looking up from his desk. "You're not the partner I need anymore. The divorce papers are being delivered to the house tomorrow." "On Valentine's Day?" she had whispered, shock rendering her nearly speechless. "It's just a day," he'd replied dismissively. "And frankly, this is better for both of us. You can go back to your little editing job, and I can focus on what matters, building Pinnacle without distractions." The humiliation had been complete when he'd suggested she leave the gala immediately. Her presence would create awkward questions he didn't want to address that night. Now, staring at the transition plan she had prepared, detailed, thoughtful, with a clear vision for Pinnacle's digital future, Xavier was forced to confront the magnitude of his misjudgment. Not just of Ciara's capabilities, but of his own character. The memory of that devastating Valentine's Day haunted Ciara as she walked back to her new office, her heels clicking purposefully on the marble floors of Pinnacle's executive suite. She had maintained her composure with Xavier, had delivered her message with the cool professionalism she had practiced for months in anticipation of this moment. But inside, her emotions churned like a storm. 3 years ago, she had left the Westbrook Hotel in tears, her marriage shattered, her self-worth in tatters. She remembered the drive to her sister's house, barely able to see through her tears, the humiliation burning like acid in her chest. Yvette had opened the door, taken one look at her face, and pulled her into a fierce embrace. What happened? What did he do? Through broken sobs, Ciara had explained how Xavier had ended their marriage with clinical detachment, as if terminating an underperforming employee rather than dissolving a 5-year partnership. "On Valentine's Day?" Yvette had exclaimed, outrage coloring her voice. "That cold-hearted, calculating. He said it was just a day," Ciara had whispered, the words still fresh and painful. "That I was a distraction from what really mattered." Yvette had guided her to the couch, wrapped her in a blanket despite the mild February night, and poured them both generous glasses of wine. "Listen to me," she had said, taking Ciara's trembling hands in hers. "That man didn't break you. He revealed himself. There's a difference." But Ciara had felt broken, hollowed out by Xavier's casual cruelty. For 5 years, she had rearranged her life to accommodate his ambitions, had dimmed her own light to avoid overshadowing him, had swallowed her ideas and opinions when they conflicted with his vision. And still, it hadn't been enough. "I don't know who I am without him," she had admitted, the confession painful in its honesty. "Then it's time you found out," Yvette had replied, her voice gentle but firm. "The Ciara I know, the one who graduated top of her class at Spelman, who wrote that thesis that had professors fighting to mentor you, who had 3 job offers before graduation. She's still in there. Xavier didn't take her away. You just let her go quiet for a while." In the weeks that followed, as the divorce proceedings moved forward with the same ruthless efficiency that characterized everything Xavier did, Ciara had slowly begun to rediscover herself. With Yvette's encouragement, she had applied for positions that matched her qualifications rather than settling for roles that wouldn't threaten Xavier's ego. When the offer came from Meridian Publishing, a senior editor position at their struggling literary imprint, she had almost turned it down, hearing Xavier's voice in her head, "That little editing job of yours." But Yvette had challenged her. "Are you going to let his voice dictate your choices even after he's gone?" That question had been the turning point. Ciara had accepted the position and thrown herself into the work with a passion that surprised even her. She discovered a talent for identifying promising manuscripts, for nurturing new voices, for strategic marketing that connected books with their ideal readers. 6 months into her tenure, she had revitalized the imprint with 3 bestsellers. A year later, She was running the division, her innovative approaches attracting attention throughout the industry. And when Meridian's CEO had approached her about leading the company's acquisition of Pinnacle Media, Ciara had recognized it for what it was. Not just an opportunity for professional advancement, but a chance to reclaim the narrative of her life. Now, sitting in the CEO's office, Ciara allowed herself a moment to acknowledge how far she had come. From the broken woman sobbing on her sister's couch to the executive who had just reassigned her ex-husband to a division he had always dismissed as secondary. The symmetry was satisfying, but not as fulfilling as she had imagined during those long nights planning her rise. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Zora, her new assistant, entered with a tentative smile. "Ms. Marshall, your 10 o'clock is here. The editorial team from the lifestyle division." "Thank you, Zora. Show them in, please." As Zora turned to leave, Ciara called after her. "And Zora? It's Ciara. Remember? We don't need to stand on ceremony." The young woman's smile widened. "Yes, ma'am. I mean Ciara." Watching her leave, Ciara made a mental note to check in with Zora later. She had specifically requested a recent graduate from Clark Atlanta University's business program for her assistant position, remembering how difficult it had been for her to break into corporate spaces without connections or mentorship. Zora Jackson was brilliant, with a perfect GPA and glowing recommendations, but also clearly nervous in this predominantly white, male environment. The meeting with the lifestyle division went smoothly, Ciara outlining her vision for integrating their content with Meridian's existing platforms. As the team filed out, energized by her ideas and approachable leadership style, Ciara felt a growing confidence that had nothing to do with Xavier or revenge. This was about building something meaningful, about creating opportunities for voices that had too often been marginalized in media. Later that afternoon, she found herself passing the digital division on her way to another meeting. Through the glass walls, she could see Xavier addressing his new team, his expression intense as he gestured toward a presentation on the large screen. Despite herself, Ciara paused to watch. This was a side of Xavier she had rarely seen during their marriage. Engaged, passionate about ideas rather than just outcomes, actually listening as a young team member offered a suggestion. Had he always had this capacity, or was this something new, born of necessity and changed circumstances? As if sensing her presence, Xavier looked up, their eyes meeting through the glass. For a moment, neither looked away. Then Ciara nodded slightly acknowledgement, not submission, and continued on her way. Sisters, have you ever turned pain into purpose? Share your comeback story in the comments below. Because sometimes our deepest wounds become the source of our greatest strength. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm at Pinnacle Media. Ciara's leadership style, collaborative but decisive, innovative but strategic, won over even the most skeptical executives. The integration with Meridian proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated, largely due to her intimate knowledge of both companies' strengths and weaknesses. To everyone's surprise, perhaps most of all his own, Xavier threw himself into revitalizing the digital division with unexpected passion. The preliminary strategy he delivered to Ciara wasn't just adequate. It was innovative, addressing problems she hadn't even identified yet. "You actually read my proposal," he remarked when she called him to her office to discuss it. Ciara looked up from the document, one eyebrow raised. "Did you think I wouldn't? I thought it might have been an exercise in humiliation," he admitted. "Busy work before you eventually pushed me out." She set the proposal aside, studying him. The Xavier before her seemed different from the man she had married. Less arrogant, more thoughtful. Whether this was genuine growth or simply adaptation to his new circumstances remained to be seen. "Contrary to what you might believe, Xavier, I didn't take this job to settle a score. I took it because I believe in what Meridian and Pinnacle can accomplish together." She gestured to his proposal. "And based on this, you might actually be an asset in that vision." A hint of his old confidence returned to his expression. "I've always been an asset, Ciara. You just never gave me the chance to show you." The unfairness of his statement hit her like a physical blow. "Never gave you the chance? I gave you 5 years of my life, Xavier. 5 years of supporting your ambitions, rearranging my career to fit yours, trying to be the perfect corporate wife while you systematically dismantled my self-worth. She hadn't meant to say any of that, had promised herself she would keep their interactions strictly professional. But the words escaped before she could stop them. Xavier had the grace to look ashamed. That's not entirely fair, isn't it? Ciara stood, needing the physical advantage of height. You ended our marriage on Valentine's Day with less consideration than you'd give to firing an underperforming assistant. You told me I was a distraction from what really mattered. And now you have the audacity to suggest I didn't give you a chance. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken history. Finally, Xavier spoke, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. You're right. I was cruel, and I've had 3 years to regret it. He met her gaze directly. But I can't change the past, Ciara. I can only try to do better now. Professionally, at least. She sat back down, suddenly exhausted. Your proposal is approved. I want weekly updates on the implementation. Xavier recognized the dismissal and stood to leave. At the door, he paused. For what it's worth, I am sorry. Not just because you're now my boss, but because you deserved better. After he left, Ciara remained at her desk, staring at the proposal without really seeing it. His apology should have felt like victory, the vindication she had secretly craved for 3 years. Instead, it had opened a door she had thought firmly closed, allowing complicated emotions to seep back into her carefully ordered life. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Zora stood in the doorway, hesitation clear in her posture. I'm sorry to disturb you, but you asked me to remind you about your dinner with Ms. Washington tonight. Ciara smiled, grateful for the distraction. Thank you, Zora. Come in for a moment, would you? The young woman entered, her professional demeanor belying her youth. Fresh out of college, Zora reminded Ciara of herself a decade ago. Brilliant, ambitious, but still learning to navigate the unwritten rules of corporate America. How are you settling in? Ciara asked. It's been, 2 weeks now? Yes, ma'am, Ciara. Zora corrected herself with a small smile. It's been incredible. I'm learning so much. Good. But I sense there's something else. You seem hesitant sometimes. Zora looked down, then squared her shoulders and met Ciara's gaze. It's just, some of the executives don't always take me seriously. Yesterday, Mr. Daniels from marketing asked me to get coffee for his meeting. When I reminded him I'm your executive assistant, not office support, he said I should be grateful for the opportunity to serve in any capacity. Ciara felt a familiar anger rise within her. How many times had she faced similar dismissals early in her career? How many times had she swallowed her pride and fetched coffee, taken notes, or been mistaken for administrative staff despite her qualifications? Thank you for telling me, she said. You were absolutely right to maintain your professional boundaries. I'll speak with Mr. Daniels. Oh, you don't have to, Zora began, alarm crossing her features. I do, Ciara interrupted gently. Not just for you, but for every young black woman who comes after you. These patterns don't change unless we change them. As Zora left, Ciara reflected on the parallel tracks her life seemed to be running on: the personal reckoning with Xavier and her past, and the professional responsibility to create a more equitable future for women like Zora. Perhaps they weren't separate at all, but different facets of the same journey toward wholeness and purpose. The transformation of Pinnacle's digital division became the talk of the industry. Under Xavier's leadership, their online platforms were reimagined, attracting younger audiences and creating new revenue streams. 6 months into Ciara's tenure as CEO, Meridian Pinnacle's stock had risen 20%, silencing any remaining critics of the acquisition. You should be pleased, Olivia remarked during a board meeting. Your vision is proving more successful than anyone anticipated. Ciara nodded, accepting the compliment with grace, but her thoughts were elsewhere. Working in such close proximity to Xavier had proven more challenging than she'd expected. Not because he was difficult, but because he wasn't. The man who now headed the digital division bore little resemblance to the cold, dismissive husband who had broken her heart. This Xavier listened to others' ideas, gave credit where it was due, and worked tirelessly to implement Ciara's vision for the company. More unsettling was the revelation that came during a strategy session with the executive team. As they reviewed Pinnacle's most successful campaigns from the past decade, Layla Johnson, the new COO, had made an offhand comment that sent a ripple of shock through Ciara. Of course, the Hartwell campaign was brilliant. That was yours, wasn't it, Ciara? Though Xavier always took credit for it. The room had gone silent, all eyes turning to Xavier, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Ciara conceptualized it, he admitted. I refined it. Refined it. Layla raised an eyebrow. The board minutes from that period show you presenting it as entirely your own work. After the meeting, Ciara had retreated to her office, memories flooding back. The Hartwell campaign, a revolutionary approach to marketing literary fiction that had put Pinnacle on the map as an innovative force in publishing. She had developed the concept during late nights at their dining room table, excited to contribute to Xavier's company in a meaningful way. When she'd shared her ideas with him, he'd been enthusiastic, offering suggestions that genuinely improved the concept. It had felt like true collaboration, until the board meeting where he presented the campaign without once mentioning her contribution. When she'd confronted him later, he'd dismissed her concerns. It's my company, Ciara. Everything that happens there reflects on me. Besides, you're my wife, my success is your success. It hadn't been the only time. As she thought back on their marriage, Ciara realized there had been a pattern, her ideas appropriated, her contributions minimized, her intelligence acknowledged only when it served his purposes. How had she not seen it then? Or had she seen but chosen to ignore it, to preserve the image of their marriage she so desperately wanted to believe in? The quarterly numbers for digital are impressive, she told Xavier during their weekly meeting. The board is particularly pleased with the new content strategy. Xavier nodded, his expression serious. The team deserves the credit. I just helped focus their efforts. False modesty doesn't suit you, Ciara said, a hint of their old familiarity slipping into her tone. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Neither does fishing for compliments. You know as well as I do that this strategy is working because it aligns with your overall vision for Meridian Pinnacle. Their eyes met briefly, and Ciara felt an unwelcome flutter in her chest. She looked away first, shuffling papers on her desk. The holiday party is next week, she said, changing the subject. Marketing wants to showcase the digital team's success. I'd like you to prepare a short presentation. Of course, Xavier agreed, then hesitated. It's at the Westbrook Hotel again? The question hung between them, heavy with meaning. The Westbrook, where he had ended their marriage 3 years ago on Valentine's Day, where she had returned triumphant as his new boss. Yes, Ciara confirmed. Tradition, apparently. Xavier nodded, his expression unreadable. Some traditions deserve reconsideration. After he left, Ciara found herself staring at the closed door, wondering if he had been referring to the venue or to something deeper, the tradition of keeping people at arm's length, of prioritizing power over connection, of letting past hurts dictate future possibilities. That evening, she met Zora for their now regular mentoring session. Over the past months, Ciara had taken the young woman under her wing, offering guidance on everything from negotiation tactics to investment strategies. Today, they were discussing Zora's proposal for a diversity initiative within the company's internship program. It's excellent, Ciara said, reviewing the document. But you'll need data to back up the business case. Not because diversity isn't inherently valuable, but because some people only understand value in terms of profit margins. Zora finished with a knowing smile. I've already compiled the research showing how diverse teams outperform homogeneous ones. Ciara felt a surge of pride. You're going to go far, Zora Jackson. Thanks to you, the younger woman replied earnestly. I've learned more from watching you these past months than in 4 years of business school. What specifically? Ciara asked, curious about how others perceived her leadership. Zora considered the question. The way you stand your ground without becoming combative. How you listen before deciding. But mostly, how you use your power to create space for others instead of just protecting your own position. The words touched Ciara deeply. In her focus on proving herself to Xavier, to the board, perhaps even to herself, she had sometimes lost sight of the broader purpose. Creating pathways for other women who faced the same barriers she had. "Can I ask you something personal?" Zora ventured, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Of course. Everyone knows about your history with Mr. Blackwood. How do you work with him so professionally? If someone had treated me that way, I don't think I could be so composed." Ciara sighed, considering how to answer. The truth? It's complicated. There are days when I look at him and all I see is the man who broke my heart on Valentine's Day, who dismissed my contributions, who made me feel small. And there are other days when I glimpse someone different, someone who might be capable of growth, of recognition, of genuine remorse. She paused, searching for the right words. "I think the hardest lesson I've had to learn is that people aren't static. The Xavier who hurt me 3 years ago and the Xavier heading our digital division today, they're the same person but not entirely. Just as I'm not the same woman he discarded." "But how do you forgive that?" Zora asked, her young face earnest. "Who says I have?" Ciara replied with a small smile. "But I've learned that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. At some point, you have to decide what serves your highest purpose, revenge or growth." Later that night, alone in her penthouse overlooking the Atlanta skyline, Ciara found herself reflecting on her own words. Had she truly moved beyond wanting revenge? Or had she simply exchanged one form of it for another, the quick satisfaction of humiliation for the deeper vindication of success? The night of the holiday party arrived with a flurry of snow unusual for Atlanta. Ciara stood by the window of her office, watching the delicate flakes swirl against the darkening sky, remembering another snowy night when she had left the Westbrook in tears, her marriage in shambles. "You look like you're a million miles away," Yvette said, entering without knocking as was her habit, "and far too serious for someone who's about to celebrate her first major success as CEO. Ciara turned, smiling at her sister. "Just thinking. About Xavier?" Yvette's perception had always been unervingly accurate. "About how much has changed," Ciara corrected, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. Yvette studied her for a moment. "You know, when you first told me about this job, I thought it was the perfect revenge. But now I'm not so sure that's what you really wanted." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Yvette said carefully, "that maybe this was never about making Xavier pay. Maybe it was about proving something to yourself, that you could rise from the ashes, that you were always more than just his wife." Ciara considered this, surprised by how accurately her sister had read the situation. "Maybe you're right, but that doesn't change the fact that he hurt me deeply." "No, it doesn't," Yvette agreed. "But forgiveness isn't about erasing the past. It's about not letting it control your future." Before Ciara could respond, Zora appeared at the door. "Your car is ready, Ms. Marshall." And Mr. Blackwood called to say the digital team's presentation is set up at the venue. "Thank you, Zora," Ciara said, gathering her coat. "We'll be right down." As they rode to the Westbrook, Ciara found herself thinking about Yvette's words. Had she truly moved beyond wanting revenge? And if so, what did she want now? If you believe true power comes from healing, not hurting, tag a sister who needs to hear this message. Because what you're about to witness isn't just a story of comeuppance, it's a testament to the strength that can only come from facing your deepest wounds. The ballroom of the Westbrook Hotel had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with silver and blue decorations catching the light from crystal chandeliers. Ciara moved through the crowd with practiced ease, accepting congratulations and making small talk, all while acutely aware of Xavier's presence across the room. He was speaking with Layla Johnson, the new COO, both of them laughing at something on a tablet they were reviewing. The sight of him so at ease, so different from the tightly controlled man she had married, stirred something in Ciara she wasn't ready to examine. Quite a transformation, isn't it? Gerald Thompson appeared at her elbow, nodding toward Xavier. "I never would have believed he could thrive in a supporting role." "People can surprise you," Ciara replied neutrally. Indeed they can, Gerald agreed, his gaze shrewd. Just as you've surprised all of us with how seamlessly you've integrated these two companies. The board couldn't be happier. I appreciate that, Gerald. Though I must admit, he continued, lowering his voice, some of us were concerned about the personal history between you and Xavier. We wondered if it might cloud your judgment. Ciara stiffened slightly. My personal history has no bearing on my professional decisions. Clearly, Gerald smiled, which is why we're so impressed. Lesser leaders might have used their position to settle old scores. As Gerald moved on to greet other guests, Ciara found herself unsettled by his words. Had everyone assumed she took this job for revenge? And if so, what did it say about her that she had sometimes thought the same thing? The evening progressed with dinner, followed by Xavier's presentation on the digital division's success. He was charismatic and engaging, giving credit to his team while skillfully highlighting how their work supported Ciara's broader vision for the company. When he finished, the applause was enthusiastic, and Ciara found herself joining in with genuine appreciation. What surprised her most, however, came at the end of his presentation. Before I conclude, Xavier said, his voice carrying across the ballroom, I want to acknowledge something that's long overdue. The foundation of our digital strategy, the innovative approach to content integration that's driving our success, isn't my creation. The core concept was developed years ago by Ciara Marshall, who saw the potential of digital platforms when many of us were still clinging to traditional models. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Ciara felt her cheeks warm as heads turned in her direction. I had the privilege of witnessing her brilliance firsthand, Xavier continued, his gaze finding hers across the room, and the regrettable habit of not always giving credit where it was due. That ends tonight. Our success is built on her vision, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to help bring it to fruition. The applause that followed was thunderous, but Ciara barely heard it over the roaring in her ears. This public acknowledgement, something she had once craved so desperately, now left her feeling strangely vulnerable, exposed in a way she hadn't anticipated. Later, as the party began to wind down, she found herself alone on the terrace, seeking a moment of quiet away from the celebration. The snow had stopped, leaving the city blanketed in white, peaceful under the winter sky. I thought I might find you out here. Xavier's voice came from behind her. You always did prefer quiet moments to loud celebrations. Ciara turned, surprised that he remembered such a detail. The presentation was excellent. Your team should be proud. Thank you. He moved to stand beside her at the railing, keeping a respectful distance. Though I suspect you didn't come out here to discuss work. She smiled faintly. No, I was just remembering. Xavier was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the city below. Not the happiest memories, I imagine. No, Ciara agreed. But necessary ones, perhaps. They stood in silence, the weight of their shared history between them. Finally, Xavier spoke, his voice low and sincere. I've wanted to tell you something for months now, but I could never find the right moment. He turned to face her. What I did to you was unforgivable, Ciara. Not just the divorce, but how I treated you during our marriage. Like you were an accessory to my success rather than a partner in it. Ciara felt her carefully constructed walls begin to tremble. Xavier, please let me finish, he said gently. Watching you these past 6 months, your vision, your leadership, the way you've transformed Meridian Pinnacle, I've realized how blind I was. You were always extraordinary, and I was too consumed with my own ambition to see it. The sincerity in his eyes made it impossible to dismiss his words as mere flattery. This wasn't the calculated charm he had once wielded so effectively. This was something raw and real. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because you deserve to hear it, he replied simply. Not because I expect forgiveness or a second chance, but because it's the truth. And because working with you again has reminded me of who I wanted to be before power became more important than people. Ciara studied him, searching for any hint of manipulation or insincerity. Finding none, she felt something shift within her, not forgiveness. Exactly, but perhaps the beginning of a path toward it. "Thank you for saying that," she said finally. "It means more than you might think." Xavier nodded, seeming to understand that this was neither rejection nor reconciliation, but something in between, an acknowledgement of truth and the possibility of healing. "We should get back inside," Ciara said after a moment. "People will be looking for us." As they turned to re-enter the ballroom, Xavier paused. "For what it's worth, Ciara, I'm proud of you. Not because you proved me wrong, but because you proved yourself right." The words followed her back into the warmth and light of the celebration, settling into a place in her heart she had thought permanently closed. The journey from that devastating Valentine's Day to this moment had been long and often painful, but standing now at the helm of a thriving company, respected by her peers and even by the man who had once dismissed her so cruelly, Ciara Marshall realized that true victory wasn't about making someone pay for past wrongs. It was about reclaiming your own worth and building a future where those wrongs no longer defined you. The following Monday, Ciara called an unexpected meeting of the executive team. As they gathered in the boardroom, curiosity evident on their faces, she stood at the head of the table with a quiet confidence that commanded attention. "Over the past 6 months, we've accomplished what many in the industry thought impossible," she began. "The integration of Meridian and Pinnacle has exceeded all projections. Our stock price is at an all-time high, and our digital platforms are setting new standards for engagement." Nods of agreement around the table, pride evident in the faces of her team. "But there's one area where we still have significant work to do," Ciara continued. "Diversity and inclusion, particularly in our leadership pipeline." She nodded to Zora, who distributed folders to each executive. "What you're receiving is a proposal developed by Zora Jackson, my executive assistant and the newest member of our strategic planning team." Surprised glances were exchanged. Zora, standing tall despite her obvious nervousness, moved to Ciara's side. "Ms. Jackson will outline the initiative, which has my full support and will be implemented immediately." As Zora began her presentation, articulate, data-driven, passionate, Ciara watched the faces around the table. Most showed interest and engagement. A few, particularly older male executives, displayed skepticism. And Xavier was listening with complete attention, already making notes, his expression thoughtful. When Zora finished, there was a moment of silence before Xavier spoke. "This is excellent work," he said, addressing Zora directly, "particularly the mentorship structure. I'd like to volunteer the digital division as the first to implement the full program." Ciara felt a surge of unexpected emotion, pride in Zora's poise, satisfaction at the positive reception, and something more complex regarding Xavier's immediate support. Perhaps people really could change. Perhaps institutions could too, with the right leadership and commitment. Later that afternoon, as she worked in her office, a text message from Yvette lit up her phone. "Dinner tonight? Need to hear about the holiday party drama. Did you make him grovel? Please say yes." Ciara smiled, typing her response. "No groveling required. Something better happened. I'll explain over wine. 7 p.m. Setting down her phone, she turned to the window, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline. The city where she had once felt so broken now spread before her like a kingdom she had rightfully claimed. Not through revenge or manipulation, but through excellence, vision, and the courage to rise when others expected her to fall. A knock at her door drew her attention. Xavier stood in the doorway, a folder in hand. "Do you have a minute? I have some thoughts on Zora's initiative I wanted to run by you." "Of course," Ciara said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "I'm interested in your perspective." As they discussed the proposal, building on each other's ideas with a synergy that felt both familiar and entirely new, Ciara realized something profound. The woman who had walked into the Valentine's Gala 6 months ago, determined to make Xavier Blackwood pay for his cruelty, was not the same woman sitting across from him now. That Ciara had been defined by her pain, her identity still tethered to what he had done to her. This Ciara, CEO, mentor, visionary, was defined by what she had built from the ashes of that pain, by the company she was transforming, the careers she was nurturing, the future she was creating not just for herself but for women like Zora who would come after her. "You're smiling," Xavier observed, pausing in his explanation of a mentorship structure. "Did I say something amusing?" "Not at all," Ciara replied. "I was just thinking about how far we've come." "The company?" "That too," she said, leaving the rest unspoken between them. As Xavier left her office, Ciara felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for 3 years. She had returned as his boss, yes. She had made him face the consequences of underestimating her, true. But the real victory wasn't in making him pay. It was in discovering that her worth had never been dependent on his recognition in the first place. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that heal, inspire, and empower. Because every queen deserves to write her own ending, one where she doesn't just survive, but thrives beyond anyone's expectations, especially her own. That evening, Ciara met Yvette at their favorite restaurant in Midtown, a cozy spot known for its southern fusion cuisine and extensive wine list. The sisters had been coming here since Ciara's divorce, first as a place of comfort during her darkest days, now as a celebration of how far she had come. "So," Yvette said after they'd ordered, leaning forward eagerly, "tell me everything. How was it being back at the Westbrook? Did Xavier squirm appropriately?" Ciara laughed, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "It wasn't what I expected, honestly. He's different." "Different how?" Yvette's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "Don't tell me you're falling for his charm again." "No, nothing like that," Ciara assured her. "But he's changed. Or maybe he's showing parts of himself I never got to see during our marriage. He publicly acknowledged that some of my ideas were behind Pinnacle's biggest successes, ideas he used to take credit for." Yvette raised an eyebrow. "Well, that's something, I suppose, though it's the bare minimum of decent behavior." "True," Ciara agreed. "But it got me thinking about what I really wanted when I took this job. Was it revenge? Validation? Or something else entirely?" Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. When the server departed, Yvette fixed her sister with a penetrating look. "What did you want, Ciara?" "Really?" Ciara considered the question, cutting into her blackened catfish. I wanted to reclaim something he took from me. Not just my professional confidence, but my sense of self-worth. For so long, I measured my value through his eyes. And now I realize that was always the problem," Ciara said softly. "Giving someone else that power over how I see myself. Whether it was Xavier or the board or anyone else, I was looking for external validation instead of recognizing my own worth." Yvette reached across the table, squeezing her sister's hand. "That's what I've been trying to tell you for 3 years. But some lessons we have to learn for ourselves." "Today I promoted Zora," Ciara said, changing the subject slightly, "from my assistant to our new diversity and inclusion strategist. You should have seen her face when I told her." "That's wonderful," Yvette beamed. "She reminds me of you at that age. Brilliant but still finding her voice." "That's exactly why I did it," Ciara nodded. "Because I remember what it was like, trying to navigate spaces that weren't designed for women who look like us. If I can make that path a little easier for Zora and others coming after her, then all of this, even the pain with Xavier, was worth it." As they finished dinner, sharing a dessert as they always did, Yvette studied her sister with pride. "You know what Grandma would say if she could see you now?" Ciara smiled, already knowing the answer. "That I've finally learned to wear my crown without letting it tilt." "Exactly," Yvette laughed. "Though she'd probably add something about not letting a man dim your shine ever again." "The shine was always there," Ciara reflected. "I just forgot how to see it for a while." Spring came to Atlanta, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Under Ciara's leadership, Meridian Pinnacle had become the industry's success story, their innovative approaches to digital media and commitment to diverse voices setting new standards across the publishing world. The executive team had gathered for their quarterly strategy session, the boardroom buzzing with energy as they reviewed the impressive results of their first year as a merged entity. The numbers speak for themselves. Layla concluded her financial presentation. We've exceeded projections in every division. Digital has been particularly strong, Gerald Thompson noted, nodding toward Xavier. Your team deserves recognition for that performance. Xavier accepted the compliment with a graciousness that still sometimes surprised Ciara. The arrogant, credit-seeking executive she had known during their marriage had been replaced by a leader who elevated his team and collaborated genuinely with peers. Before we move on, Ciara said, I want to address something important. As you know, I've been approached by several other companies about acquisition opportunities. Attention settled over the room. These offers had been the subject of industry speculation for months, larger conglomerates, seeking to absorb Meridian Pinnacle's success into their own portfolios. I've decided to decline all offers, Ciara continued. Instead, I'm proposing we expand our independence through a new initiative focused on supporting independent publishers, particularly those highlighting underrepresented voices. She outlined her vision, a program that would provide resources, distribution channels, and mentorship to smaller publishers who lack the infrastructure to compete with industry giants. It's ambitious, she acknowledged, and it will require significant investment upfront. But I believe it aligns with our core values and positions us for sustainable growth that isn't dependent on simply getting bigger through acquisition. The discussion that followed was lively, with executives raising valid concerns about implementation challenges and financial projections. Throughout it all, Ciara noticed Xavier watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. When the meeting concluded, he lingered as others filed out, waiting until they were alone before speaking. That was unexpected, he said. Turning down acquisition offers that would have tripled your compensation package. Ciara shrugged, gathering her notes. Money has never been my primary motivation. I know, Xavier said quietly. That was something I never fully understood about you. I always assumed everyone was driven by the same things I was. Status, power, financial success. And now? Ciara asked, curious despite herself. Now I see there are different kinds of success, he replied. What you're building here, it's not just about market share or stock prices. It's about creating something meaningful, something that changes people's lives. The sincerity in his voice touched something in Ciara. That's all I ever wanted, Xavier. Even when we were married. To build something that mattered. He nodded, regret flickering across his features. I know that now. Too late, perhaps, but I do understand. As he turned to leave, Ciara found herself calling after him. It's never too late to build something that matters, Xavier. That's the whole point. He paused at the door, a small smile touching his lips. Thank you for that. And for something else I've never properly acknowledged, the chance to rediscover who I am beyond the ambition that consumed me for so long. After he left, Ciara stood at the boardroom window, watching the Atlanta spring unfold below. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, their delicate pink a reminder of nature's capacity for renewal after the harshest winters. 3 years ago, broken and humiliated on Valentine's Day, she could never have imagined standing here, not just professionally successful, but personally whole in a way she hadn't been even during her marriage. The journey from that devastating night to this moment of quiet triumph had transformed her in ways that went far beyond career advancement or vindication. She had learned that true power wasn't about controlling others or even proving them wrong. It was about governing yourself, about making choices aligned with your deepest values rather than reactions to past wounds. 1 year to the day after Ciara had walked into the Valentine's Gala as Pinnacle's new CEO, she found herself addressing a conference room filled with young women from Atlanta's historically black colleges and universities. The mentorship program she had established, inspired by Zora's initiative, had grown beyond Meridian Pinnacle to include partnerships with other major corporations across the city. The path won't always be straight, she told them, looking into faces filled with the same ambition and hope she had once felt. There will be detours, roadblocks, and sometimes painful dead ends that force you to turn around and start again. She moved from behind the podium, wanting to connect more directly with these young women who reminded her so much of herself at their age. But here's what I want you to remember on the hardest days. Your worth isn't determined by someone else's inability to see your value. Your potential isn't limited by another person's imagination. And your success isn't defined by conventional metrics of power or wealth, but by the impact you have on others. From the back of the room, Ciara spotted Zora watching with pride, now confidently leading the diversity initiative that had become a model for the industry. Beside her stood Yvette, who had taken a sabbatical from her own career to help expand the mentorship program nationally. Someone once told me I was a distraction from what really mattered. Ciara continued, her voice strong and clear. It took me years to realize that what really matters is not what others say about you, but what you know to be true about yourself. After the session, as the young women gathered around her with questions and gratitude, Ciara felt a sense of fulfillment that no corporate achievement could match. This, creating pathways for others, sharing hard-won wisdom, building a community of support, was the legacy she wanted to leave. Later that evening, she returned to her office to find a small package on her desk with a handwritten note. Opening it, she discovered a first-edition copy of Toni Morrison's Beloved. A book she had once mentioned to Xavier was transformative in her understanding of resilience and reclamation. The note read simply, "To new beginnings and stories of our own making. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like." Ciara ran her fingers over the book's cover, a complex mix of emotions washing through her. Not the bitter anger that had once consumed her, nor the desperate need for his approval that had characterized their marriage, but something more nuanced: appreciation for the acknowledgement, recognition of how far they both had come, and most importantly, the peaceful certainty that her worth had never depended on his recognition. She placed the book on her shelf, a reminder not of what she had lost, but of what she had found in the aftermath: her voice, her purpose, her true self. The journey from that devastating Valentine's Day to this moment of quiet strength hadn't been about making Xavier pay for his cruelty. It had been about discovering that the greatest power comes not from controlling others, but from mastering yourself, your reactions, your choices, your definition of success. Ciara Marshall had returned as his boss, yes, but more importantly, she had returned to herself, stronger, wiser, and finally free from the need for anyone else's validation. As she looked out at the Atlanta skyline, the city lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky, Ciara felt a profound gratitude for the path that had led her here, even its most painful stretches. For it was in those broken places that she had discovered her most unbreakable parts. And in the end, that was the most satisfying revenge of all: not making someone else pay, but refusing to let them cost you your joy, your purpose, or your power to define your own worth. The woman who had once been broken by rejection on Valentine's Day now stood complete in her own right, not as someone's wife or someone's boss, but simply and powerfully as herself. Ciara Marshall, a woman who had transformed her deepest wound into her greatest strength, and in doing so, created a legacy that would outlast any corporate title or personal vindication. That was the true victory, not over Xavier, but over the voice inside that had once believed him when he said she wasn't enough. Because she had always been more than enough. She had simply needed to remember it. And now she would help other women remember it too. That was her purpose. That was her power. That was her peace. If this story of reclaiming your power resonated with you, subscribe to Timeless Love Tales with Mr. Harrison for more stories that heal, inspire, and empower. Because every queen deserves to write her own ending, one where she doesn't just survive, but thrives beyond anyone's expectations, especially her own. Remember, sisters, sometimes the most powerful response to being broken isn't revenge. It's rebuilding something stronger than before. Something that can never be taken from you again. Your unshakable knowledge of your own worth.